So good morning. So today we're going to talk about the dangers of smoking and vaping. And this is a very current topic because there were two studies that were just released that showed how vaping has been on the rise. And it was the largest annual increase in any drug use in the history of these studies. So teenagers and people have really started increasing the use of vaping, and we're going to see, is that bad and why is it bad? So before we do that, we have to look about tobacco and nicotine and smoking, and then we'll go into the use of Ecigs. So tobacco was discovered actually in 6000 BCE, and they started using it, they dried the leaves. So tobacco is a plant that grows. It's part of a nightshade family of plants. This includes tomatoes and eggplants and potatoes. And tobacco contains the highest level of nicotine. So they dry the leaves and they put them in products like cigarettes. So then the leaves go into cigarettes, which is a paper roll. And then the tobacco is burned, and then the smoke is inhaled, and the ingredients from the cigarette smoke is then inhaled. But also chew tobacco, and active ingredient from tobacco, which is nicotine, is then put into Ecigs. So before we go into tobacco, we just have to define what addiction is, because that really in itself is a whole other topic, the science of addiction. But addiction is a compulsive use of a substance, despite harmful consequences. So you know that it's harming you, but you do it anyway. And it actually causes actual biochemical changes in the brain. It's not something that's imagined, something that's real. And over time, people with addiction build up a tolerance, meaning they need larger amounts to feel the effects. When a person has an addiction, they stop taking the substance and engaging in it, then they feel withdrawal. So they actually feel biological changes. They feel they need to have that substance again, otherwise things happen to their body. So that's what's classified as addiction. So nicotine is the addictive substance in tobacco, and this is its chemical structure. It's made of carbon, nitrogen, and some double bonds, some single bonds. And as we said, it's also found in eggplants, but don't worry, you only have to eat 20 pounds of eggplants in order to get the nicotine in one cigarette. So if you eat a lot of eggplants, it's not so bad. How does nicotine work? So nicotine, when again the tobacco is burned and it's inhaled into the mouth and nose, then it goes down into the lungs, and then it diffuses into the blood. And it works really fast. It's like a sprinter. It goes really fast because the lungs have a big surface area. They have alveoli, which have a big surface area, which enables the nicotine to go quickly into the blood. Then from the blood, it goes into the brain cells, the neurons. Neurons are the fundamental units of the brain and nervous system. So nicotine has an effect on these neurons, and let's see how. So neurons send messages to other neurons through something called neurotransmitters. Those are the chemicals that are released by the neurons, and there's a space between neurons called the synapse. And the neurotransmitters go from one neuron to the next neuron and take the message. One neuron is activated and tells the next neuron to continue carrying that message and then eventually performing some function. So neurotransmitters are what take these messages. Also, neurotransmitters can also activate the neurons. So there's a receptor here called the nicotinic acetylcholic receptor. And it's called that because it actually binds both acetylcholine and nicotine. So the acetylcholine, which is naturally produced by the body, binds to the nicotine receptor. And what it does is the acetylcholine receptor. And then what that does is it activates the neuron to release dopamine. And dopamine is the pleasure chemical of the brain. It causes the neurons to activate a reward pathway. It makes you feel warm and fuzzy and good. And this is actually evolutionary favorable because in order for us to do things that our body needs, they have to be enjoyable. For example, in order to eat, we need to eat to survive. If eating wasn't very pleasant, then you wouldn't do it so as often. But if every time you bite into a nice warm brownie, you get a warm fuzzy feeling, then you are going to feel that you're going to do it again and again. So once the reward pathway is activated, that's good for us. So this receptor is activated by acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, which is naturally found in our body when released when we do something pleasurable. But nicotine also mimics acetylcholine. So when nicotine is inhaled, it activates this receptor to also release dopamine, this pleasure chemical. And that's what makes you feel warm and fuzzy. When a smoker inhales the nicotine, they feel warm and fuzzy and good because this dopamine is released. So you can see what happens, though, is that the body gets very used to having this nicotine. So start cigarette smoking. There's a nicotine spike. So now the receptors are activated. Once they're activated, they release dopamine, and they feel pleasure. And that feels good. The problem is the body very quickly stops making its own acetylcholine, and now it's dependent on having nicotine to feel this feeling of feeling good. Once these receptors are desensitized, it's because the nicotine level drops, now these receptors are inactive. Dopamine is low. So the body starts to feel withdrawal symptoms. So it starts to crave nicotine again. And once it's craving the nicotine, so now it starts smoking again, and the cycle continues. You can see also, though, the body actually gets conditioned to feel to have this nicotine. So it gets conditioned that it needs nicotine in order to feel good. Also, a lot of times people smoke when they're doing other things. So I can sit down to watch TV, to read a book, and they get that's an environmental cue. So now whenever they read a book or watch TV, they need to smoke. So then that's a cue and makes them have a craving also of smoking. Also, there's a secondary reinforcing effect of nicotine. So studies have shown they gave visual cues to people who are smoking and non-smokers. And the people were smoking nicotine, actually their attention was longer, and they enjoyed the visual cues more than the non-smokers. Problem is, the body gets used to that so fast that then it's a secondary reinforcing effect, so it actually makes regular activities more pleasurable. So that means when the nicotine is not there, these activities become less pleasurable. You need to smoke to make you feel good. It's about doing almost anything. Nicotine is also a gateway substance. So it's so interesting that nicotine causes people who are addicted to nicotine, will then go on very often to progress to cocaine and other drugs. But it's not the reverse. People who are addicted to cocaine will not then get addicted to nicotine. And one of the reasons, first of all, is that some other drugs cause a huge high, whereas nicotine is very slow. It's like slow kicks, but it's constant. It's easy. The cigarette is available. So easy just to constantly puff the cigarette. Once the body gets used to having this constant hits of nicotine, then progresses to want more and more powerful drugs. Also, nicotine actually encourages expression in the reward circuit of a specific gene that teaches our brain to be addicted to drugs, to want to have drugs. So nicotine will teach your brain to now want cocaine and heroin. This is really especially dangerous for teenagers because teenagers' brain has not finished developing. Our brains actually don't finish developing until we're 25. And the prefrontal cortex is the area in the brain that has not been finished developed, and that's where this reward pathway is involved with. So it actually causes changes in the teenage brain. In fact, they've done studies that teenagers who are addicted to nicotine when they're teenagers, later on in life, they have impulse issues, they have attention deficits, even after they stopped using nicotine. So it causes biochemical changes in the brain that sometimes cannot be reversed. Also, while they are addicted to nicotine, definitely causes attention deficit and issues because their brain is so malleable as it's developing. And just as an aside, it's just something that when we're teaching teenagers how to deal with teenagers have a lot of issues and problems they're going through, they're growing up. It's hard to, if they are being taught the other problem, let's figure out how to have a solution. But if they're being taught that, no, let's just get nicotine. And nicotine will help. That solves your problems. Then besides the fact that they get used to that, they don't learn how to problem solve. They always use nicotine to help them feel better. Okay, nicotine has also relaxed alertness. What that means is we said the relaxation is caused by the dopamine being released, but also it causes an alertness. That's because besides for activating the dopamine receptors, it also activates our fight or flight, which is, let's say, see a tiger or a lion, you get scared. So what happens? You can feel this burst of adrenaline, and then adrenaline causes the body to have the blood pressure increase, the blood vessels narrow, and your heart races, and that causes you to feel very alert. So nicotine does this also. So that's why it's this relaxed alertness. It's kind of paradoxical where you feel relaxed, but also feel this extra feeling of being alert. Now that also causes the glucose in your blood, a glucose dump into the blood. So that means that the body's converting some of the stored fats, glucagon, into glucose, and it inhibits insulin so that the glucose is not taken out of the blood. That is parenthetically why smoking is also an appetite suppressant, because of the constant high level of glucose in the blood when nicotine is taken in. So that's why nicotine is considered a stimulant and a depressant. You can see all the things that it activates in your body, both causing this feeling of pleasure and a feeling of increased alertness. So my daughter was reading over some of my presentation, and she got to this point, and she said, "Mommy, smoking is so good." Because, right, you feel relaxed, you feel alert. So I said, wait, you have to read on. And let's see why smoking is so dangerous. And so we'll see now what are the harmful effects of having all these changes in our body because of nicotine. First of all, it's very interesting that more people die from heart disease from smoking than from lung cancer. And that's because they die earlier from the effects of heart disease. They've done autopsies on people who have died from heart disease due to smoking, and they've seen that there are tumors in their lungs. So probably they were going to get lung cancer, but they didn't have a chance yet because they died of heart disease first. So nicotine itself, besides for tobacco, nicotine itself can cause problems with the blood vessels called atherosclerosis. That's a hardening of the arteries and a buildup of plaque. So there are muscle cells that are around our blood vessels that cause it to contract and relax. And we said that nicotine causes your heart to beat faster, and it causes these blood vessels to contract and relax often. So that in itself is not good. But these muscle cells when they're activated too much, the nicotine causes them to become like drills. And they drill through the blood vessels, and they start to then build up on the side of the blood vessels. And that causes atherosclerosis, or a narrowing and hardening of the arteries. If this happens in arteries that are peripheral, that's bad. If it happens in the coronary artery, that causes a heart attack. So that's very dangerous and causes heart disease. So you see, these are just side effects of nicotine. We haven't gotten to the chemicals released from tobacco. Just nicotine itself causes all these different problems. Okay, so, and you can see it in pregnancy, it causes risks to children later in life, all these blood pressure, central nervous system, circulation issues, and gastrointestinal issues. So a cigarette is basically just a roll of paper with tobacco inside. And if you look at a healthy lung and a lung of a smoker, you could see the difference between the lung of someone who has not smoked and someone who has smoked. And this is because of tar. So just going back here for a second, if you look, these are just some of the chemicals that are released when you inhale tobacco. So how does a cigarette work? You have tobacco in there, light it up, and tobacco starts to burn. Whenever combustion happens, which is burning, if it's complete combustion, usually there are just a small amount of products that are released, whatever from the combustion reaction. But if there's incomplete combustion, not incomplete burning, other chemicals are released. And incomplete combustion is what happens in cigarettes. So while the nicotine is burning, the tobacco is burning, it's releasing all these different chemicals. And that is what tar is. Tar is the particulate matter suspended in the smoke that then settles on the lungs. So these are just some of the dangerous chemicals, the most dangerous chemicals. There are about 7,000. These are 10 of the most dangerous. And you could see who would want to take into their body cadmium, formaldehyde, acetone, benzene, carbon monoxide. And besides for that, there are short-term effects when you smoke. Okay, so just see this clip for a minute that shows you the short-term effects right away when you start smoking.
Let's look at what happens as their ingredients make their way through our bodies and how we benefit physically when we finally give up smoking. With each inhalation, smoke brings its more than 5,000 chemical substances into contact with the body's tissues. From the start, tar, a black resinous material, begins to coat the teeth and gums, damaging tooth enamel and eventually causing decay. Over time, smoke also damages nerve endings in the nose, causing loss of smell. Inside the airways and lungs, smoke increases the likelihood of infections, as well as chronic diseases like bronchitis and emphysema. It does this by damaging the cilia, tiny hair-like structures whose job it is to keep the airways clean. It then fills the alveoli, tiny air sacs that enable the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and blood. A toxic gas called carbon monoxide crosses that membrane into the blood, binding to hemoglobin and displacing the oxygen it would usually have transported around the body. That's one of the reasons smoking can lead to oxygen deprivation and shortness of breath.
Okay, so those are the short-term effects, and then we have the long-term effects of having these chemicals in the body. So besides for the heart disease that we talked about, there's lung cancer, and cancer is because once it goes from the blood, right, goes into the lungs, goes into the blood then carries it through the body, so it can cause cancer in many parts of the body. Besides for the smoker themselves, secondhand smoke is really bad for the people that are around the smoker. So if the person smokes in a house, the people who are exposed to that smoke are also in danger. Short term causes burning of the eyes and nose, could cause problems breathing, and people who are exposed to it have double the risks of heart disease and causes 30 times as many lung cancer deaths as all regulated air pollutants combined. There's also something we don't think about often, which is third-hand smoke. You go to a hotel and make sure to get a non-smoking room. A smoking room is really a bad place to be in. The particles from the smoke settle onto the furniture in the room, and then a child goes and touches the furniture and puts it in their mouth. They are actually taking in some of the chemicals from smoking. So that's considered third-hand smoke, which is a big risk also. So cigarette smoking is responsible for more than 480,000 deaths per year, including more than 41,000 deaths resulting from secondhand smoke exposure. This is about 1 in 5 deaths annually. So about 13,000 people are dying every day from this. On average, smokers die 10 years earlier than non-smokers, causes more than 5 million deaths per year worldwide. And then for every person who dies from a smoking-related disease, 20 more people suffer from a smoking-related disease. You know, people were smoking for a very, very long, they were taking in tobacco for a long time. In the late 19th century, that's when they automated the production of cigarettes, and it became very popular. And it wasn't until the 1960s that the studies were published that finally the Surgeon General came out and said that there's a relationship between smoking and lung cancer, and the World Health Organization jumped on board, and then they started having a campaign against smoking. But it took a really long time till they were able to realize the relationship between smoking, and let's keep this in mind when we talk about vaping Ecigs. What about smoking 1 cigarette a day? Just 1. So men have about a 48% high risk of heart disease and 25% high risk of stroke. Women's even higher, 57% for heart disease and 31% for heart disease and stroke. So although cutting down has clear benefits, still, so it's better to have 1 than many a day, but still we clearly show that no safe level of smoking exists for cardiovascular disease. They need to quit completely. Okay, cigars. So cigars are a whole art. If you Google cigar smoking, they have instructional videos on how to smoke a cigar. It's different than smoking a cigarette. Because when you take a cigar, you actually don't inhale the vapor, so that's the proper way is not to inhale it. They swish it into their mouth, have it swish around, and then they exhale it. So cigar smokers think that it's safer because they're not inhaling the smoke. So a cigar is basically more tobacco with a wrapper of tobacco. And if you see cigarettes are less than 1 gram of tobacco each, cigars contain between 1 and 20 grams of tobacco. So are there harmful chemicals? Yes, we're still burning tobacco. So even though you might not inhale it, it still diffuses through the lining of the mouth. That's why cigar smokers enjoy smoking a cigar. And when they make cigars, they take the tobacco leaves and they ferment them in a process that actually produces more harmful chemicals called TSNAs, or tobacco-specific nitrous amines, which are the most carcinogenic compounds known to man. So that's what cigar smokers are taking in when they breathe on a cigar. Also, they're larger, so there's longer smoking time, more chemicals being produced. So again, with cigars, the only safe level of cigar smoking is none at all. It's not clear. People say I only smoke a cigar once a week. They haven't done really so many studies on things like that, but clearly you're taking in all these things into your body. The only safe level is none at all. Okay, so Ecigs. So this was originally marketed as a way for people who are smokers to stop smoking. What is an Ecig? So an Ecig has e-juice in it, and has e-juice. The e-juice goes into the Ecig and then is vaporized. So first of all, e-juice is nicotine from the tobacco. So it's not tobacco itself, it's just the nicotine either taken out from tobacco or synthetically made. And it's dissolved in either propylene glycol or glycerin. And also there are usually flavorings added to make it taste good, and it's much more pleasant when it's like that. It's put into this atomizer, and a heating element then vaporizes the e-juice, and that's what's inhaled. So first of all, when they started developing Ecigs, they said, we're not going to call it smoking, because if we say that it's smoking, no one's going to do it. It's vaping. But you're taking in a vapor. It's very similar to smoking. It's not all the tobacco chemicals. So the Ecig, when they were marketing Ecigs, they said, you're just taking vapor in. Well, let's see, is that true? So, it's only 3 simple parts, but there's still the nicotine in there, that addictive chemical nicotine, and we saw all the harmful effects that just nicotine has. So these are from 2 websites that market Ecigs. So they say e-liquid contains only 4 chemicals. Cigarette smoke contains 4,000 chemicals. Problem is, that's right. The e-liquid itself only contains 4 chemicals, but once you vaporize it, it starts to contain many chemicals just like cigarette smoke. Also, they say It's food flavoring. A lot of these chemicals you would eat. So things like menthol or malic acid, you eat them. But there are many things that are safe to eat that are not safe to inhale. So even though it might be safe to eat them, it's not safe to inhale them. So are Ecigs safer? They contain many of the same toxic chemicals, so they will not resist the risks for bronchitis, emphysema, and heart disease. And they've started to do studies. You know, they were just released. They started to become popular in the past few years. There are not really enough long-term studies, but all the short-term studies point to Ecig use being very dangerous. So the American Chemical Society did a study where they examined the saliva of 5 adults before and after a 15-minute vaping session. The saliva had an increase in potentially dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde and acrolein, which could cause changes in DNA, which can lead to cancer. A study of mice found that e-cig smoke could cause mutations in DNA. And they just released a study by the Journal of Pediatrics of 70,000 people, and they found that it could double the risk for heart attack. So these are some of the chemicals, 42 out of, there are many, many more. These are 42 of the chemicals. And again, we see some of these chemicals that we saw in the cigarette smoke that are there. We have the nicotine, we have formaldehyde, we have benzene. And they tested the urine of people who vaped, and they saw that they had high concentrations of many of these harmful chemicals. Also, the fruit flavors have acrylonitrile, which is a known carcinogen. Again, they're taking that into their body. It also, many of the flavorings have an ingredient called diacetyl. Diacetyl was found in popcorn, the flavoring of popcorn, and it was used for people in popcorn factories, and they started getting coughs, and they were not reversible. They couldn't cure them, and this is because of something called popcorn lung. So they stopped adding this to popcorn, but they have now put this into flavorings in e-cigs. So this can cause an irreversible disease where it causes shortness of breath and coughing. So we see it's clearly not advisable for someone to start vaping e-cigs if they haven't been, and if you have anything to do with smoking. But what about someone who's already smoking? Is vaping a better alternative? So far there are no large high-quality studies looking at whether e-cigs can be used to cut down or quit smoking long-term. Most of them have been pretty short-term, but they're starting to come out. So a study done in 4 countries found that e-cig users were no more likely to quit than regular smokers, even though 85% of them said they're using them to quit. Other year-long studies conducted in the US had similar findings. A year-long study published in 2018 compared smokers who used e-cigs to traditional cigarette smokers and concluded that e-cig users were more likely to say they were trying to quit, but no more likely to successfully kick the smoking habit. 90% were still using smoking regular cigarettes at the end of the study. So that's why the FDA has actually not approved it. If you see the e-cig companies marketing, they marketed it as it's used for quitting smoke, but the FDA has not approved it. Yeah.
There was an article in the New York Times, like in the past 2 weeks, on the front page about how pediatricians don't know what to do about this. Like, they're at a total loss. Pediatricians across the United States don't know what to recommend to parents of teens who are vaping, because it was supposed to help, in theory, help quit smoking.
Right.
It's not doing that. They're addicted. Cutting cold turkey brings withdrawal. You know, getting angry at teens is, unfortunately, might be likely to push them more toward it. And there's nothing good that, like, it might help like reduce smoking, but nothing can help it yet. And so they don't. It's like a real like what's it called? Challenge in the pediatric community, right?
Yeah.
It's really something.
Right, exactly. And you see, and it is, and it's so addictive, and once they start, it's very hard to stop. So yeah, it's a huge problem. So this is why I think education is the most important. We have to educate parents and educate teenagers. So, but yeah. So if you've heard of juuling, so what is juuling? So in 2015, there was a small company that they started a couple of years ago, and they wanted to really market their e-cigs well. So they called it juuling to connote something, an object of beauty, like a jewel, J-E-W-E-L. They called it J-U-U-L, and they decided to have it as, they never realized that, and they made it into a verb, to jewel. They have their e-cigs contain 59 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter. That's equal to an entire pack of cigarettes. And the crazy thing is, by the way, this is one of the co-founders of Juul. You see he's he's the advertiser that he jewels. And the Juul sales are booming. So not only are our teens getting addicted to nicotine and to e-cigs, they're getting addicted to the strongest form of inhaling nicotine. 2004 and 2015, here's when they started calling it juuling and increased their marketing to teenagers. And all of a sudden, they've taken over the market. They've over 50% market share of e-cigs. This was their advertising in 2015. If you look at the advertisements, so what do you notice about it? You notice, yeah.
It looks fun.
Yeah, right? What age these people look?
20s.
Yeah, right, they're young, they're cool, they're hip, it's all colorful. So this was the advertisement they were doing, and now they're under investigation by the Massachusetts Attorney General and the federal government whether they were actually specifically targeting teenagers. So they said our models were always were always over 21, but we know to teenagers, a 22-year-old that looks cool is going to make them want to do something also. So because of this pressure, they've changed their marketing. So this is now in 2018, this is the same web page. You see it's much darker colors. The person looks older. He still looks happy, but it says for smokers by design, and it says warning: this product contains nicotine, which is an addictive chemical. So we're not all the way there because really there should be more information here, but they're on the way. And this is because of pressure, though. It wasn't that they claim they did this because they actually don't want to market to teenagers, but obviously they want to increase their sales. So juuling has been banned in Israel because they realize how dangerous it is. It contains nicotine at a concentration higher than 20 milligrams per milliliter and poses a grave risk to public health. Okay, so what about e-cigs in teens? The younger people are when they begin smoking, the more likely it is they will develop the habit. Nearly 9 out of 10 smokers started before they're 18. So if we think nearly 9 out of 10 smokers started before they're 18, and how many kids now are addicted to nicotine, what does that say? What's going to happen to them when they get older? Will they be our future smokers? And we worked so hard to stop the advertising campaigns making smoking cool and stop the crazy spread of cigarette smoking, and now are we just totally regressing? Nicotine and other chemicals found in e-cigs juuls might harm brain development, like we talked about, same nicotine, and may cause cancer and heart disease. And vaping may introduce many more young people to smoking who might otherwise never have tried it. And once they're addicted to nicotine, some may decide to get their fix from regular cigarettes. Whether vaping or juuling is a gateway to regular cigarettes or not, young people who use them risk becoming addicted to nicotine and exposing their lungs to harmful chemicals. So in itself is a risk, and as a gateway to smoking, it's even more of a risk. Another problem, which is a whole other topic in itself, is marijuana. There are many teens that put marijuana in their e-cigs. And marijuana use is also not great. So it can adversely affect learning and memory, can impair later academic achievement. And 1 out of every 11 students surveyed, or 9%, said yes, they put marijuana in their e-cigs. The crazy thing is they don't even know what they're doing. Look at this survey. This was a survey of teens asking them what's in the e-cigs that you're vaping, and 66% of them thought it was just flavoring. They're just having water vapor with flavoring. Some thought it was knew there was marijuana. 13% had no idea, and only 13% knew there was nicotine in them. So this is probably where the New York Times article was linked to, is that the Surgeon General finally came out and said it's an epidemic. Because they did this study, which we talked about in the beginning, is that in 2017, 11.7% of high school seniors were using e-cigs, and now 20.8%. That's a 78% increase in 1 year. That's 20.8% of high school seniors are vaping. And I asked actually some of the students in my note, and they said when they go on trips with other high schoolers, they didn't say anything specific, but specific groups that it's coming from, but they said when they go there, sometimes there's so much smoke, even in places that you're not allowed to smoke, there's so much smoke from the e-cigs from their friends that they just can't get over it. And people are just turning a blind eye. They go to a park, and you're not allowed to smoke in these parks, and yet they'll just vaping is rampant. So they said they actually see it, and they don't even know how dangerous it is. And look at middle school students. 5% of middle school students are vaping. Would you ever think that 5% of middle school students would be smoking a cigarette? But 5% of that are vaping. And what they could do after that, how then it gets them addicted to nicotine and then to smoking. So the Surgeon General called it an epidemic based on this study called Monitoring the Future by the National Institute for Drug Abuse. And they said that vaping is reversing hard-fought declines in the number of adolescents who use nicotine. These results suggest that vaping is leading youth into nicotine use and nicotine addiction, not away from it. So it's a gateway to smoking. Again, the director of the study said not only are teen users of popular vaping devices like Juul re-glamorizing a smoking-like behavior that years of prevention campaigns had effectively stigmatized, they might be paving the way for a transition to conventional cigarettes as well as other substances. A non-user, someone who doesn't use e-cigs at all, is only 8% likely to start smoking in 6 months. Someone who's vaping e-cigs, 31% likely to start smoking within 6 months. Again, it's clearly a gateway. Teens who are unlikely to have smoked cigarettes if e-cigs didn't exist are now vaping, and teens who vape are at an increased risk of becoming conventional cigarette smokers. So the Surgeon General said that it's an epidemic, and he said he doesn't use this term lightly. I don't want there to be any misconceptions about this. I don't use that word epidemic, which means a sudden increase about abnormally expected numbers. I do not use that word lightly. And he said we need all hands on deck. We need to figure out a way to fight this epidemic of vaping. The FDA started to try. They woke up a little bit too late, but they're trying. They have rules that now you can't sell to under 18, you can't sell e-juice to under 18, and they actually have forced e-cig companies to stop marketing their e-juice. Look at this. This is a regular box of apple juice, and this is e-cig juice. Okay? Look how similar they look. And how is a teen supposed to know the difference between them? So they have outlawed this, so you can't have them look exactly the same. And they're also trying to have age-restricted locations so that there can only be like in a roped-off area, that they're trying to put that into effect now, that it shouldn't be sold with everything else. There's a study, if you want more information about this, there's a study called The Public Health Consequences of E-cigs. It was done by National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and has 47 conclusions about e-cig use. So there's a lot of there. Because people say, oh yeah, all you're saying is a theory, it hasn't been proven, but it shows the things that are actually proven, things that might be true, and things that they think are true but haven't been proven yet. So if you want to look there, there's a lot of information about that. We have to counteract the advertising that our teens are exposed to. If you see, 7 in 10 of them are exposed to ads. Right? We know using social media, they are exposed to ads constantly. We have to be the ones to educate our teens to combat all this unhealthy advertising that's happening to them. You see they're getting from everywhere, from retail ads, internet ads, TV ads, newspaper magazine ads. They're all getting this bombarded with information like it's great, it's fun, it's healthy, when we know it's not. So we have to educate them. And I really think that the way we could combat this, there have to be a two-pronged effect, right? We have to have the teenagers that are already on, how do we help them quit? And the teenagers that haven't started, to educate them and to teach them what are they doing and to help them not get addicted to e-cig use. I'm just going to end with another common use of tobacco, which is hookah. So people also, there are these hookah bars now, and they're becoming more and more popular, and those also, they look very attractive because they're these very pretty containers. So what is a hookah? So they take tobacco, and they put it in a tray on the top, and on top of that they put charcoal. The charcoal goes on top of a piece of aluminum foil that's then on top of the tobacco. So then they burn the charcoal, and the charcoal heats the tobacco underneath. The tobacco goes down, and the smoke goes down, and then it goes through this water, which cools it, and then that gets inhaled. So they inhale it through the pipe. So people think that the water filters out the chemicals from the tobacco. Well, it doesn't. Also, there are these pieces from the metal, from the aluminum foil, that can go and be carried in with the smoke. So, also not healthy. Excess smoke inhalation in long hookah sessions, typically they last about 1 to 2 hours. So there's a long time of inhaling tobacco. That's like a real hookah user. Also, people share the same hookah pipes. That can spread things like herpes, so that's an infection. There's an increased risk of cancer, lung dysfunction, and heart disease because they're inhaling tobacco smoke, and it's the same harmful chemicals as cigarettes. So we said the standard session is equivalent to 15 packs of cigarettes, and there are these metal fragments of the foil, which are a major irritant to the lungs. So, this is the new look of nicotine addiction. I started with how tobacco started from 6,000 BC. We've gone all the way up until now where we've tried to stop nicotine addiction and stop smoking, but now we have a new face of nicotine addiction that it's up to us to learn about and to educate our children and our friends about the dangers of smoking and about vaping so that this stops becoming an epidemic. Okay, are there any questions? Yes.
What about these e-cigs that have no nicotine? Are they in New Jersey? Does a person have to be 18 to buy that?
Right. So yeah, I'm not sure actually if the FDA outlaws e-cig juice that doesn't have any nicotine in it. It doesn't have this. First of all, most teens will not differentiate between having the e-cig juice that doesn't have nicotine and that does.
Right.
So they're much very likely to just go on to nicotine ones. I don't know about the law there. Do you know? Are they? Is it? I don't know. But but they're also going to progress. Also, there's still chemicals that are burned because you have this vaping and still have this combustion going on. So it's not completely safe.
Seems like a trick to start people, and then the second they turn 18, then they can go start them with the nicotine after that.
Right, that's true also.
Although from what I'm hearing, the age restriction doesn't seem to be slowing the things down.
Right.
So where are they getting this stuff? Online? They're buying it?
Yeah, so that's the problem also, is that even though in theory the law is that you can't buy it unless you're under 18, it's so accessible. It's so easy for them. A lot of times someone will go and just buy, someone who's over 18 will go and buy tons of e-liquid or e-juice, and then they sell it in the high schools, and they'll sell it's very easily accessible. Because it's so accessible, heroin, no, you can't just go and buy heroin in the store, so then it's very hard for even a 25-year-old to find it. But here, a 22-year-old can go buy it and then sell it to 17-year-olds or 16-year-olds.
And lastly, do all the Maya Note students go through this seminar?
My students have a health program in 10th grade where they're exposed to the dangers of smoking. Actually, my students here can let us know whether e-cigs were covered in 10th grade. I think that's kind of the next frontier for us, is to talk about. We have a lot of health programming, but in terms of like a discrete unit of study, that's the next thing.
Yeah, I did give a mishmar session.
Yeah,
That was a combination of the halachot of like, are you allowed to put yourself in danger by smoking and e-cig use, and it had also about the science about it. It was sort of a bridge version of this. So many of them have learned this, but yeah, it's
we
true.
were thinking that like this should be given in
the whole
school.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another way for you to pioneer.
All right, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed and have a great rest of your day.